Starting with a very small artifact here, and it's exciting to me to start with this because even something this small embodies and expresses gigantic principles, and therefore can have a very potent effect, and at this scale is so easily replicable. But it isn't so much the physical construction that is really the revelation here. And I guess I should give more context. This has been credited as the very first so-called little free library in the world. And I don't know if it is the first at all, but it was built in 1996 before the official movement began in 2013. And this little piece is credited as being the first. And so the reason it's interesting to talk about is I've been able to watch the progression of this as something that was initiated illegally and very strategically. So it's a very small scaled, meager thing, but it engenders patterns that are absolutely beyond scale. So first of all, it was built without a permit. It was done to activate and involve these two foster children that were actually abused in a house just a couple of houses from this location. And so there were a few of us who were motivated to get these kids away from the house and teach them how to use tools, because we knew they were being unmentored and they had no father and they had no actual mother. So it was a really kind of dystopic situation that they were in. So the beginning of this movement is with the teaching of children. The installation happened without a permit. We've located it in public space where in the grid you're told that you have no power. And so doing it as a youth involvement project and having it be a model of mentorship is perhaps the most significant thing, but it was very strategic in the way that we did not get a permit and we located it in public space. We were challenging the idea that we were powerless locally, and we were challenging the idea that the public street is not actually a functional, interactive, creative commons. And so we did a lot of things at once, and we immediately got in trouble. But the fact that we had done a lot of community building work to get to this point activated the neighborhood around us to fight with the city on behalf of this little catalyst. So what we had done was we had made a sort of a surgical incision into the body of our own kind of civic dysfunction and challenged issues on many scales by doing this. And I'll show you how this proceeds. But this little piece, you know, back in 1996 was really, for me, part of the beginning of my own kind of design activism that has led to just projects and involvements at many different scales and geographies. So I offer this to young aspiring designers, especially, to consider how they themselves might choose a strategic leverage point in their own community and act directly, organizing people to come together to challenge the idea that people are powerless where they live, and to just alchemize, you know, cast off materials as a demonstration project of ecological design in such a lovely and simple way. While, you know, what we're doing here is we're actually practicing the principles of permaculture, but through placemaking. So we're stacking many different opportunities and activating awareness and challenging systems and many, many other kind of outcomes all at once. Next image. This is a view, just kind of a fanciful view from a promotional poster. This was for the 15th year of our citywide barn raising, and which is called the Village Building Convergence, and it happens every year at the end of May and the beginning of June in Portland, Oregon. And it's inspired many other cities to begin to do this. But that little library leads to this kind of activity. The library, along with a couple of other early insurgencies, kind of shifted some perspectives and activity in the city in a very significant way. People were used to forms of activism based on resistance, and of course that's important and understandable, but they were not accustomed to the idea that people would undertake activism as a form of direct creative manifestation. So instead of just fighting against what you don't want, to actually directly create what you do want. And by doing that, give yourself more practice in imagining and developing your capacity for visioning and challenging systems and understanding systems, interpreting systems, and then creating transformative models. Sometimes collaboratively, sometimes spontaneously. And so this first model I showed you was in '96. Our barn raising project began in 2001, and then and is going on to this day with cities all over, I mean, communities all over the city. We've coalesced more than 1,000 different kind of collective self-organized groups in the city to undertake projects. And some of them are related to urban agriculture. A whole lot of them are related to subverting public space. And I'll just tell you, what I'm showing you in this image is what is now legally possible and is actually going on in Portland now. To transform the streets into public spaces can be done directly, but usually you'd be swept away by the police unless you've managed to transform the bureaucracy and the political leadership and create new ordinances. And we've done all that. The city government, the bureaucracy is on our side in taking over streets and turning them into people spaces. And at this point, we literally any community can transform as many street intersections into public squares as they want to for free in a 2-week process to go from the beginning of design to the actual creation of it. The caveat is that they have to design it themselves. This is, imagine a bureaucracy requiring that a neighborhood must self-organize, with a minimum impact and a minimum level of involvement, and then decide what they want to do, and then fund it and enact it themselves, and then be able to evolve it and program it with whatever activity they want over time. So that's what we've managed to accomplish, not only in the residential zones, but really across commercial space as well, and in institutional settings. I think that we have very powerfully contributed to the transformation of our political leadership to the extent that we now have the most progressive, radical, and diverse city council and civic leadership that we have ever had, taking a quantum leap this year, actually. I'm very excited about that. And what I'm doing is I'm just showing you a drawing of what is now legally possible and well underway in this city. So it's all based on the idea of the barn raising, of course. And at a certain point, like we've had this progression, and at first we noticed, oh my God, we live in the colonial grid. There's no gathering places at all. Americans are deficient community gathering places to the extent that we have the fewest in all so-called first world nations. We have the most socially isolated communities within the colonial grid. And that's a revelation. And then at a certain point, for those of us that have studied this, then we remember some of what we've learned before, or somewhere along the way, we have our suspicions verified by direct experience. And we're saying to ourselves, oh my God, well, without place, you don't have a culture of stewardship that coheres and occupies that space. And then as you're kind of organizing around that, you realize, oh my God, we're missing the inherent cultural rituals that are supposed to play out cyclically over time, that really have punctuated and accelerated the process of cultural evolution through all the millennia of our existence. We need rituals in space, And that leads us to the barn raising. And at a certain point, we realize, my God, like our entire reality has really been designed to the point where, I mean, not only do we not even know what's happened to us, we've been hit so hard that we're senseless, and we just, we go ahead just being conscripted to working hard every day to support the reality that oppresses us, clearly. But as a designer, I'm in this looking around, and I'm constantly looking for how I can kind of like have agency in the situation and make a difference once I learn something and apply what I've learned in a design strategy. But to realize that, like, the grid designs the gathering place out of the crossroads, and that's a circumstance that you can still visit in cultures around the planet. And at the very least, the gathering place will be proximate to the crossroads, if not in the very center of it, as you would find in just, commonly everyone understands that you would see this in Spain or in Italy or in a Dogon village. So, then we realize they've designed the very rituals out of our reality. And we all talk about getting out of the box and thinking outside of the box, and realizing that we're in these kind of compartmentalized realities that are sort of 365, 24/7. But to actually, like, the success of what we're doing to challenge these systems is verified instantly, really immediately, when people come together and they make decisions and they feel like they're part of a greater whole. I swear, for people living in North America, to go from a life of kind of cultivated self-isolation in how you define your sense of self, to actually having the experience of being part of a collaboration where you feel heard and received, and then you actually get the chance to learn how enriching it is to actually be supportive of others, awakens your sort of deeper, more inherent self, I would say. So we've been helping people all over the continent, and here we are in Cleveland, working with a group there. But this is really the idea, to give us an opportunity to be our highest, fullest individual self, which you can only find, I would say at this point, this is the return on my own investigation. You can only attain that in the context of other people becoming powerful with you. Okay, so a lot of our work is obviously going to be very collaborative, and we make decisions together. But in order to be really full spectrum in our creativity, we take our teams of people and we build spontaneously as well. So here we are out at the Pickathon Festival, and there's a music festival held in the forest just outside of Portland, in Southeast Portland, within biking distance. And our creative groups in city repair and communitecture go out there with tools, and we simply go across the surface of the forest and we find fallen trees and branches, and we build the environments for the musicians that come from all over the world to play here. And like here we are looking at the wood stage. People come onto the stage and they say things like, I've always wanted to come here. This is the place I've always wanted to be. I have a theory that the reason that they jam so hard and so beautifully on this particular stage is because the stage itself is manifesting a joy and a spontaneity that brings something out of the musicians. And it's a kind of environment that musicians almost never find themselves in, except in maybe the most informal settings. So we've really brought together branches and trees, and we've kind of created rhythms and forms that evoke movement and emotion that then inspires the musicians. But that's only possible because we don't have a drawing, we don't have a plan, we haven't discussed it. We talk about what it's like to be a bird and gather branches and weave them together in terms of our structural principles. But in terms of the actual design concept, sometimes it's absurd, sometimes it's paradoxical, but it's always in the service of everyone who will witness it or who will actually create the music. And so we're feeling about the people and then creating with our hands in the moment. And I think this is essential for designers to reclaim the birthright of spontaneous placemaking. And I don't know if we will create a more resilient world without each of us being able to practice this. And I am saying that the codes and strictures of patriarchy constrain us to such an extent that we have forgotten how important this is. But each of us knows about this. We've put a blanket over a table and put pillows under a table to recreate the space that we used to know inside of our mothers. We have gathered materials and gone up into a tree to make kind of a nest or a basket. We've created these containers as an enclosure spontaneously as children. We've reimagined our entire landscapes inside of our minds. And so this is just one strategy that we as an intentional design activist culture have employed to kind of help us remember how to do this, but together in big ways. So looking at the design context of what we're facing, I know we're looking at the colonial grid here, and you might not necessarily identify this where you are, but I don't think that you have to be in long, straight, flat lines like this that compartmentalize everyone into boxes to understand what it's like to live within an authoritarian kind of design regime. I mean, the idea that some few people configure the patterns that everyone else have to inhabit means that you will be within their set of goals and priorities. And to say that once they're done, that the only flexibility exists within the container of the lot that you own, the space that you control through ownership, is a gigantic question that I don't, I don't think our reality is, the question is not settled for any of us who have feelings that this is good enough and that this is our destiny. For one thing, this design obfuscates common culture, but let's just go back to the very beginning of the violence of how these lines are drawn. First of all, there's a story that all these people that are here have to exist in denial of, which is that these are laid down on stolen land with the most unbelievable, inconceivable levels of violence and ignorance, with craven intent. And the idea, I mean, I want to be able to say this in a way where anyone, no matter what their political philosophy or sense of history, so they can actually nod and assent that yes, this is the reality that I experience. I don't know if I've managed to accomplish that, but to say that this is where the world became commodified, surely everyone can say that yes, that's true. To go from it being understood as a bioregion, where stories have persisted of families, place-based people for millennia, and then it's suddenly violently transitioned to become a place that people have to spend their whole lives just to work to pay for a place in it, is a moment that didn't involve enough people in gaining their consent that would actually be the reality they would want to serve. So this is what we're dealing with in placemaking. In the Western Hemisphere, placemaking is inherently a revolutionary act. It challenges design assumptions or design intentions that you would be powerless, that there would be no commons, people would have no place to even talk or interact or create with the people that they live among. So, if you listen to Noam Chomsky, and I think he's got the most kind of coherent voice with the most sweeping perspective on this. USA is laid out as a giant real estate investment, and of course, everything I was just saying about taking the land and turning it into a commodity is the basis of it. But it's been done by a very few people who are just laughing all the way to the bank, and going insane themselves at the same time. I think very fortunately, this young woman, Lizzie Maggie, invented the game Monopoly as a way of helping people in the Western Hemisphere to kind of get a deeper view into their own experience. The rules of Monopoly are actually a condensed version of both the Canadian Dominion Land Survey and the National Land Ordinance of 1785 of the United States, and also the Law of the Indies that was imposed over all lands south of the border with Mexico. So it's a condensed version, and it sort of tells you how to play the game of just being part of a commodified landscape. And interestingly, the only form of commons is a jail and a parking lot. There's no imperative to build culture. It's just a way of practicing the idea that everything can be liquefied and power ultimately is concentrated. So I think of placemaking. I don't even want to do placemaking. I don't even want to do any form of activism unless we're challenging this in the most accessible way. We were talking earlier before the presentation, saying something about my travels, but the point of that story was Isaiah's kind of wondering, like, how do we actually help each other to have a transformative experience? And I think I don't have definitive answers, but I have many answers. And one of them is for each of us to be able to get a grip, a functional kind of framework through which to see the craven design intent that we're occupying, and to allow oneself to feel I think it can be almost crushing, but to feel how offensive these systems are to our very humanity and how they set us against each other, but ultimately that they waste our time making us work to support the systems that then just further enrich the class of people that really intend to oppress the world. It helps you to be inspired to disengage. and to look for ways to create alternative cultures. So I think that's part of the answer, to get a sense of context. But I think for people who have had a transformative shift, to then bring people together around creating models. For myself, I was so deeply confused. I needed to get away and have people over and over again tell me their stories, so that I could, I mean, I'm obviously a white male, deeply conditioned white male, and I needed to get away from all of it and immerse myself in the realities of other people, and then listen to them tell me what they saw as I mean, I was asking over and over again, what can you tell me what is wrong with my people and what's wrong with me? And that can be really boring if there's people are just talking about you. So fortunately, that wasn't the only thing we talked about. But I came back full of people's perspective on the dysfunctions of imperialism and the consequences of cultural disruption. I don't think everyone needs to go away to do that. Some people have allies all around them. They have grandmothers still in their lives, and if they get a mix of a perspective on how poorly and basically the nature of the designs that we find ourselves in, the hierarchies that we find ourselves in, and relate to that personally, and then relate the impact to your own families personally and to your own struggles personally, and really get a grip on that. And then somehow find a way to be able to creatively assert alternative patterns, not just of behavior and not just of like voting majorities, but of literally getting outside and challenging assumptions out in public space where whatever you do, everyone will see. Especially, I think that the answer is to really challenge the assumption that is explicit in the commons, that we are powerless and that the world is a commodity. This image of these two women kissing, to me, this is the point. And I have to say, I'm constantly designing things collaboratively that manifest overtly sustainable patterns, resilient patterns like bioswales and living roofs. And I'm sitting in a building wrapped in straw clay, and that's all lovely. But to me, I need to get to the point, like what is it that we're actually serving, that we want to exist. And to me, this image, this is my personal image. This is an emblem of the point that I keep in my heart and in my consciousness, always on the front edge. This is what I'm fighting for. And I basically encapsulate it this way, that everyone, everywhere needs to be able to love whoever they love, however they love, right now in public space. And that's my guiding principle. And all the ecological systems that I'm contributing to serve that ultimate vision. Oops. And also the restoration of our relationship, of humanity's relationship to nature. And also, obviously as part of that, to see ourselves in a larger body, a larger tree of life, where we're making places for the other species and we're protecting the other families in the tree of life. So this is kind of an overarching vision. And I'm not just speaking on my own behalf. This is a shared perspective in the work that we do in city repair, and how interesting it is that people just see what we do and they understand it, and we don't have to go through constant trainings to make sure that everyone agrees on this. They just come into confluence and we go shoulder to shoulder and we work on something that we already know we overwhelmingly share together. This is quite actually an old image of the impact. I haven't got an updated image, but this is from 2013. All these different colors represent things like village scale initiatives, intersection interventions, urban agriculture installations. Many of these are in public space, natural building projects in both private and institutional and commercial settings, and then also energy demonstration projects and initiatives, and water systems. And this is as far as we had gotten in trying to subvert the systems of our city by 2013. And now this, you can almost not see the city anymore for all of the density that you would actually have on a map that's tracking all of the success. And this is only what our three organizations have been a part of. The rest of the city is positively motivated. I'll just say that. And when you hear things about struggles going on in Portland, Oregon, as characterized by the media, what you're not getting is the deeper story, that we have by far the greatest amount of activity, the highest rate of citizen participation in all things in the city, and that the Portland Plan itself, the vision document that the city leadership is constantly enacting, is its highest mandate is the participation of the citizens in all things. So Portland is having these struggles in the streets because we have a tremendous culture of persistence and creativity. Okay, so this is the secret kind of vision, though, of city repair as a whole. Years ago, when we were just getting started to create things like that library. In fact, this just preceded the library, this drawing. We call this the sacred napkin of world peace. You know, you've sat around in the cafe with your friends talking about the challenging issues of the day and reading articles out of papers and sharing your ideas. Well, we had this day where finally somebody had brought pens to the coffee shop and we had enough napkins around us, and my friend Pedro just said, none of you are getting out of here without contributing to this conversation. We need to, you know, focus our education and our privilege upon a strategic approach. And at the end of a half an hour, we had this drawing, which was just to say cities all over the world, cultures all over the world have been subjugated and conscripted into these patterns to serve like a vision that they don't support. Let's subvert our one city in the global network. Let's basically apply our ecological studies to seeing the global ecology of humanity as a similar system, you know, in which the cities are seen as nodes in the ecology. So we subvert or heal a node in order to inspire activity in all of the other nodes, which of course is how a mycelial network actually functions under a forest floor. So just to act in an ecological fashion became our kind of inevitably successful strategy. And of course, so many people all over the world have been acting this way since forever. So I'm not trying to claim that this is an original strategy, but it helped us to have a drawing and actually see it with clarity together. Okay, so I'm just going to go through a series of strategies and projects as fast as I can so I can show you more about what we're talking about. Here's where we're taking the menu from Kevin Lynch's book, Image of the City, and applying it retroactively to the neighborhoods in the colonial grid. So this is looking at the neighborhood where I'm sitting, where our initial activity commenced. And this is looking at just the typical patterns of major roadways and commercial districts. And this helps to account for why Americans refer lovingly to the idea of Main Street, but they don't tend to have a single damn public square, city by city, town by town. So what we have is a Main Street because the public square was not included in these giant documents that directed the development of westward, you know, the guided westward expansion and manifest destiny to take the form of the urban structures that are absent gathering places. I hope for some of you this is a breathtaking revelation, like, oh my God, of course when I go to America, so few opportunities there are for me to just go to a social circumstance. Like people have to go to a park maybe to try to interact if they're like out walking their dog and they say like nice dog to another person, and that becomes a chance to talk. So here we are looking at this neighborhood where I'm sitting with no gathering places except for commercial districts where you have to pay for a spot or justify your presence in a cafe by paying for something to drink. Okay, so first of all, we start to examine the fact that there are roadways that come in and out of the perimeter of this overall development that's called a neighborhood. So these green circles represent the strategic leverage points for engendering a sense of identity using Kevin Lynch's analysis. And then, of course, the crossroads become the major nodes for transforming the public right-of-way into a gathering space and literally taking the surfaces of the streets and changing them, enhancing them, and also changing how people then come into the streets and how cars have to behave differently. So these are nodes of activity that we are recognizing that are already going on in the neighborhood, and our challenge is to network them together into a linkage or a mycelial network, if you will, and to recognize that people travel between these destinations with a kind of a more direct or diagonal sensibility. So we're actually looking at the pathways that we need to reinforce in order to strengthen the network. And then punctuated throughout the reality are all of these stories where things have happened. Some of these are things that are associated with his historical preservation. Some of them are heritage trees. Some of them are playgrounds. Some of them are art and sculpture. And so we start to network these things together. But also what you're seeing are suggestions for things to actually happen. Okay, so I'll stop with that. I'm going to go on to show you things from small to large scale. So civic anarchy. I hope you're already familiar with the most ecological forms of building, referring to natural building here. This is where a person will just say, oh my God, I've realized I live in the grid and there's nowhere to gather, so I'm going to give up my own freaking front yard and make it into a place for people to gather. And in this case, the man who owns this lot in this house had just read an article. I remember this because I worked specifically directly with this project. He had just read that it was a feminist critique of unsustainability, in which the author was pointing out that, of course, when the majority of the patterns that we're witnessing are directed or dictated by basically white men between 35 and 85, and this is like the narrowest slice of the human pie, and these are the kinds of people who can't even hug each other or tell their wives they love them, that of course you won't have gathering places and nothing will be much fun. That's the gist of the article. And so he walked across the street and spoke to this young woman, but back when she was about 5 years old, and just said, would you please tell me what you think a better world would look like? And it included, her idea was to create a place that kind of had this theme like the ocean, and that it would feature a big sister mermaid for her, made of cob. You can see that the big sister has a void behind her so that the little sister can actually hug her, and that was part of the design that was enacted 15 years ago. And now you can see that the young girl has herself grown up to become a woman, and a bit of a mermaid herself. And so this is my kind of anarchy, where we actually decide to just say, fuck it, we're going to create directly to transform our own reality. And if we're meant to be separate and not speak to each other, then we'll defy that emphasis by creating places that are going to convene and bring people together. This is looking at a typical block in Southeast Portland. I'm actually sitting on this block where we're applying permaculture master plans to the houses on the block. And at this point, that block, every single house has a master plan, but where family by family, people have a resilience strategy and also a set of ways to actually connect with each other and take down fences, put in pathways, have common amenities, common gardens, common saunas, and the like. And incidentally, it became an issue for us really early, those of us that are designers, that if you don't have enough money, then you don't get design support. So we created a way, especially through our educational processes, for our students to provide design services as a social justice initiative so that everyone in our city would have access to design support and have, plans and visions to help them make proposals and to accelerate the process of change. Now we're actually on that block, and we really do have a model of the block, and people were wanting to build micro housing for activists and community saunas, and people got so excited during the meetings they really did go out and take down fences directly between each other. This is a model of a block by and for that block to enable them to explore alternative designs and patterns. So you can see that they're reconfiguring pathways that cross property lines, and there's urban agriculture in the form of perennial systems and annual systems. It's just, there's layers and layers of every possible thing that you could investigate. And then this quickly takes the form of economic initiatives like this zero carbon nursery school, which is now featured on the block. If you can bring your child from within walking distance, then you can be part of this nursery school, but you can't drive to bring your child. This Dr. Adriana, this naturopath, then retrofits her house with a straw bale addition, and then infills her front porch to create a bathroom for the local postal people, because after all, they have nowhere to go during the day. And it's also for the homeless people of the neighborhood. So this kind of outwardness is cultivated and inspired when people have this sense of collective connection. Also on the block, this house is a retrofit into this urban agriculture, urban permaculture teaching facility. It's actually become a school. I'm sitting in it right now in this living room you see in the lower right. So the house is wrapped illegally with straw clay, and the house is coated in cob, sculptural cob on the outside, and it has all these other ecological systems. It's actually rather like an urban form of an earth ship. But it fundamentally challenges so many things, including the idea that we can't teach each other locally. We can't have schools within the residential zone on our own authority, except on the most limited scale. So we do this on a really big scale with as many people feel like being involved. And that's partially to cultivate a radical, unwieldy, uncontrollable sensibility in everyone who wants to be involved. And we reported ourselves to the city. We said, "Oh no, we've wrapped our house in straw clay. You might want to come take a look." And so, it's monitored and tested, and then as a result, straw clay was legalized for the rest of the city. So there's a lot more to that story. It's not that simple. Like we've obviously had to make many relationships and have lots of successes before that point. But still, people are building below the radar ecological initiatives in the form of housing all over the city. And these are some that work within a provision that allow people to build things without permits if they're under 200 square feet. So here are 4 different houses that people live in that all, like the one on the upper left is the first load-bearing straw bale in the city. The one on the upper right is a timber frame using reclaimed materials from the neighborhood itself, infilled with straw clay and finished with earth and plaster. The one on the lower left is the Moon Cottage, and that's straw clay with Larson trusses. The one on the right is this insane hybrid of cob and hemp fiber and compressed straw. And also still on the same block, the place is just bursting with urban orchards and perennial vegetable gardens, annual vegetable gardens. I have a kitten here wanting attention. You're gonna have to wait, Nonami. This is the famous cat palace. Most of the people on the block have, not cat palace, this is the chicken palace. There's also a cat palace on the block, sorry, for this cat. This is the chicken palace, and it's in the shape of an egg. And we're really making fun of Christopher Alexander here, who is, of course he's our hero, but he's always talking about human patterns. And so we thought, well, surely chickens have patterns too. Wouldn't they prefer to live in an egg-shaped home? Wouldn't they want to set that on spindly legs that would remind them of their giant chicken mother? Wouldn't the front porch be made out of recycled plexiglass in the form of a giant chicken beak? And wouldn't it be topped with a weather vane, featuring people instead? So we're having fun here. And this is looking at the model of the block where the people living on this block together have all figured out how they're going to create individual and shared systems that transition them in the face of climate change. But also, as we were saying before the presentation got started, to get back to the timeless destiny of being indomitable place-based villagers. Here's just looking at, this is a permaculture design that is just kind of a lot at a time approach, where our friend JTU has disengaged from Silicon Valley, come to Portland, and built a facility that he uses to accommodate immigrant families, brings multiple immigrant families into this place, but it's essentially a permaculture paradise of catchment and solar gain, edible landscapes, and actually food production to the extent that he actually can sell at a local farmer's market, but punctuated by gathering places. Here's another category. This is perhaps our most infamous and beloved project, the transformation of street intersections into public squares. And what you're seeing is this is a lower income, working class community where everyone within 2 blocks has had an opportunity to contribute to the design, and then they fundraise together, and then they implement the project. And with every family collectively contributing less than $20, there's enough to enact this. And the intensely vegetated landscape you see that they're occupying here has been planted over time by them. Many of these plants and trees and food forests are 25 years old or younger, but Yeah, this is quite a incredible story, and from this point, many other projects have been inspired throughout that neighborhood, around the city, and many other cities. The idea that is most subversive about this, I would say, from a bureaucratic standpoint, is that we intend to inspire spot zoning to emerge as a concept, as a tool in the planning toolbox, so that every neighborhood will be able to retroactively install a village center that enables pedestrian and bicycle based commercial activity within easy walking distance. Like basically, you know, if you're part of planning culture, you might have heard of the idea of the 20-minute neighborhood being this ideal, like somehow we'll make it possible for people living in food deserts to only walk 20 minutes. What we're talking about is something like a 1-minute neighborhood. We want people to be able to walk out of their house and walk to the adjacent intersection and find that there's activity there which is employing local youth, but is characterized by absolutely local ownership. And, you know, for those of you who have traveled, for instance, to Central America, you've seen this all over the place, where people are able to open some kind of shop right on the edge of their own house, like in Quetzaltenango, where I've spent a lot of time. This characterizes the community there. Fact is, Portland now has a document that we're sharing with cities. This is from the Department of Transportation, and these are a set of ordinances and standards that any city can in the USA, and of course very much so in Canada and Mexico, because our strictures and structures are formulated to be very much the same, and so the precedents enacted within the colonial grid can easily be transferable to other locations. But the main transferable principle being your own participation, your own direct place-based activity, and creativity applied in the commons. So these are some of the initial projects that were installed in the first intersection transformation. This is a solar-powered T-station you see here that has been created by the neighbors with their own hands, not needing to spend any money. They've just taken what they already had, their own tools and branches from trees and scrap metal, and basically pump thermoses and cups, and they installed this on a corner illegally. And then here are these kids all holding tables, and they come from 4 different families, but they've built these things together with their parents collectively teaching them how to do it. So the kids are always involved in the construction. That's just a few of the features at that place. It's now possible to grow food throughout the residential and commercial right-of-ways of the city, and also to install composting systems out in the street. And all of this is done for free on your own authority. And it only took a few people to organize doing this, that then it made it legal for everyone else in the city to be able to do. Same thing. Portland has just been we've been planting fruit trees and nut trees illegally in the public right-of-way for so long that the city realized that most of us at this point were criminals. So they had to retroactively legalize it in order for them not to be, having to, basically to cause otherwise a huge bureaucratic problem to just go away, and to recognize that the culture had just kind of legalized itself through pervasive activity. That's an interesting twist. At a certain point, the kiosks that began in Portland have been, they were spreading all across the country clearly, and we were hearing around the world. And so the mayor declared little community kiosk day, and decided at a certain point, I think it was maybe 6 or 8 years ago, that anyone anywhere could just install these, and you would be automatically permitted because you did it, and you would be automatically protected by the city in terms of insurance against any problems that would happen, and no permits were required. It's fascinating to see this kind of evolution in the consciousness and the behavior of the bureaucracy play out like this, to see that the power of the executive, actually, once the mayor is involved like this, it is such that things such as this have been possible actually the whole time. And to realize that this has been possible the whole time is deeply stirring and motivating. What's next, I ask myself. So here's a bunch of what's next. People building trellises over sidewalks, spanning from private space onto public space and blurring the boundary in between. Like, that seems impossible. How would an insurance program ever support that? How would an insurance program ever support? Here's a transportation engineer who actually works with kids to build raised planters out in streets to slow traffic while building pollinator habitat. How's that even possible? I would say one of the most exciting things, Isaias, when we were talking earlier about inspiring people and helping them have their transformative moment, once they're part of a creative culture like this, I think that they're in that moment they can be in that moment in an extended way and just continue to shock themselves and have epiphanies. But we have to begin by creating models. Like, I know that there are people that come to Portland and they see these things and they're like, oh my gosh, I'm going to go home to where I live and do that too. And that really gets back to that napkin image. We just need to be inspiring creative misbehavior to the point where people forget that they weren't supposed to do that. I don't know. Maybe don't ever forget. No, always keep it in your mind. Because I can't stop remembering. I'm doing this on behalf of my ancestors and also all those mistakes that my ancestors have made. Covered bike parking shelters, solar-powered cob kiosks, composting facilities really are legal within the right-of-way in all residential zones. So like 6,000 miles of residential right-of-way in this city alone are now available for locating composting facilities. I happen to think that the hardest work tends to be more of the initial stages, and then inspiring the activity to become broad and just a cultural basis is the rest of the work. And here we're just looking at some of the artifacts that people are creating. Here's Pedro and Adriana in the upper right, and they've created Santiago, another little neighbor. And that's maybe the most important story. You're bringing people together in a way that alters their destiny, and it literally brings them together in ways that creates new human beings. And I think that that's not just a metaphor, it's actually reality. You're creating the basis for an entirely new future. I like to ask this question, like, if we ever did win in our cultures of resistance, like you see with the overthrow and assassination of Ceausescu, I think it was in Romania, okay, now he's dead, but what's next? Like, if you ever manage to overthrow the oppressive reality, how will you inhabit it differently? How will the systems actually be fundamentally different? We started our conversation earlier by talking about the idea that there would be a local kind of place basis for a changed, more sustainable reality. What I'm noticing about that reality as it's coalescing where I live is that it elicits a sense of humor and irony, and a spectrum of emotional experience that you don't otherwise get to experience within the structures of patriarchy. Like, look at this. Here's the Selwood Bee. It's our local paper, and we're putting it into a beehive-shaped newspaper dispenser because of a 13-year-old young woman was just driven that this is what we had to do this year, and everybody still laughs about it, and the people at the Bee love to bring newspapers and stock this facility. But what I learned then was the involvement of a greater diversity of people will mean a more enjoyable and rich experience in ways that are almost not foreseeable, especially by people who are based in fear. So here's a more conventional kind of strategy that you might have seen before. Here we are working in Duncan, British Columbia, on the idea of creating a public square for the first time in this city. You can see there's a lot of different design variations. In fact, we had 5 groups working, came up with 5 different strategies. And then the next iteration or the next cycle of design activity was to combine strongest features and express preferences into 3 kind of overall schemes, and then to go through another round of evaluation and feedback to finally arrive at this scheme. There's a lot of different things integrated here, but transforming the crossroads into the center, kind of a distinct center, symbolic center of the city, is obviously a feature of this design. The totem poles that you see distributed around the space, 3 of them are expressing the involvement of the proximate tribe. It's immediately proximate to the city. And then all the other things that are going on there are basically meeting needs of the urban population, but also expressing their very powerful desire to test and inhabit ecological design strategies. So you see numerous floating sheltering roofs here, and then the planting of native species that support distressed pollinators. And there's just sort of on and on about that. But these are views into the site. We see children playing in kind of a naturescape, and the totem forms a kind of a gateway into the space from the crossroads. There's an open kind of commons with a form of native grass, and then a bit of a performance pavilion, which is used more informally most of the time. And here we have a street where the opioid, in the same town where the opioid epidemic has really taken over, and people are literally killing each other frequently on this street at night as drug dealing is proceeding. And there's just a lot to this story. What I'm showing you here are public involvement strategies where people who are kind of the most affected stakeholders, as well as others within the community, come together and problem solve through the issues to come up with design strategies. And the plan here is to attract a broader, more diverse set of kind of users to the space, not just day, but as well as at night. And this is just kind of showing you 5 different categories of elements that are enacted on the street, from activated spaces and placemaking to revegetated landscape for a lot of different reasons. And then vertical transformation kind of effects having to do with storefront improvements and murals, and then things that are going on overhead, like micro housing on rooftops, and shade fabric, sculptural shade fabric overhead, green roofs, and power generating facilities. And then this is looking at it kind of in a plan view and also on the ground. What we're seeing is just a streetscape, but it has a kind of a creative intervention along the entire length of it that's designed to support pedestrian-based activity, and to also create a stronger linkage between the immediate residential communities and the commercial functions and businesses on the street. And you might say, as you're looking at this, some of this is just so ordinary, and that's partly because we are looking at, the westernmost kind of edge of westward expansion, and what we commonly inhabit on that edge is a perfunctory landscape really directed toward working and functioning and producing and making money. And the idea that there would even be a bench or a place to sit in the shade or an amenable, lovely crossroads is actually a revelation for a lot of cities and towns. There's quite a scarcity mentality, especially when you have conservative interests dominating the political infrastructure. So here's just using some sort of lighting effects in order to create a sense of center on the street. And then the graphic effects on the street recognizes that actual cultural activities and festivals are happening in a regular way on the street. This is on the right, you see a transformed police station where we're saying we're going to decompartmentalize the police and actually create a social porch, a place for people to get food and drinks, and a way for homeless people to actually sit with the police while we put micro housing for homeless people on the roof of the police. So the police are basically inescapably now linked to some of the communities that they are characteristically very much too often vilifying and victimizing. And so the strategy of the community is to say that, no, the police actually will now inhabit a community center. That's where their office will be. And we're going to humanize that culture. So just more images of these interventions. So all of this is directed by the community. It's the community voice and this community vision. And you might say, well, that's a very exceptional street. And I think you'd be right to say that. But also I want to tell you that what we're saying here is that North Americans are sick and tired of having to buy a ticket to fly across the ocean to visit an actual cultural landscape that at best is medieval, and somehow was created and manifests patterns from before, people of color, and especially women, within these circumstances were even recognized as being fully human. So we're asking ourselves, what is a 21st society like that actually embraces the principles of diversity and equity and inclusivity, and then manifests that as a common culture? Like, what would that look like? And that's really the challenge that we posed to this community. What would that look like? And obviously it's an imperfect community with a lot of challenges, but this is to be a model for how all streets can be, how all cultural spaces can be. What I'm going to show you now very quickly is funded by the Rockefeller Foundation after Hurricane Sandy on the East Coast, where they realized fully that climate change is real. And then they enacted the 100 Cities initiative to confront climate change in both American and Canadian cities that are kind of located strategically in a lot of different diverse circumstances with diverse people. And this is just a diagram, again, retroactively applying Kevin Lynch's formula of placemaking, gateways, pathways, boundaries, centers, nodes, and monuments, but retroactively to Vallejo, a very, very diverse community in the northern part of the Bay Area. And this is the prototypical block in Vallejo, characterized by an alley running down the center. And this is just showing what is ordinarily just residential fabric, but retrofit with affordable housing, micro-affordable housing in the red color, placemaking in the pink. Yellow and blue is solar electric and hot water, and then the other circles are composting systems and gray water and water catchment. And this is just showing, I mean, this is obviously very diagrammatic, but this is what leads to the implementation of ordinances and policies and budgets. So this is showing how we would retrofit the block to make space for all these things to happen, and then scale it up across the entire city. And this is, for Rockefeller, you know, climate change isn't just about dealing with rising water. It's about the instability and the cultural emergency, and also the need to recreate economy. I remember the director of the program standing in front of our group. 10 teams from all over the world were selected to work on these projects and to redesign the entire Bay Area within a 3-month process called Resilient by Design, the Bay Area Challenge. And we were a group of permaculturists kind of plucked out of all of the different applications. And so we were very much kind of based, most of the people on the team were based in the Bay. This is a proposal that we created to recreate 3 million square feet of remnant naval architecture, or revitalize this architecture on Mare Island, which is a military installation in the northern part of the bay, with all this abandoned landscape, and to instead turn it into housing and also kind of makerspace living, essentially, for houseless people and immigrant populations to have family wage jobs, to be able to live in their multi-generational, intergenerational communities while they're able to work and live in the same place, and to be able to make livelihood and to produce the resilient technology that they themselves and the rest of the region would need. And there's also an ecological arts center and an educational facility also on the island. The day we were visiting that island and developing the proposal, there was a mass shooting in the Bay Area, which of course you know is happening in the USA kind of all the time. And so this inspired the creation of an extension of this military cemetery that already exists on the island, but to take the top of the island and turn it into a new prototype for public space, which has to do with some people gathering in large groups to mourn and feel and share. This is down within the landscape, looking at some of the repurposed military naval architecture that is, is historically associated with making boats, but instead to house people and to produce. This is looking at almost the entirety of San Francisco that we redesigned into an enormous kind of the world's biggest water catchment facility, you might say, where instead of using the sewer system to get rid of water on the streets, to instead use it to convert it into a catchment system, and also to employ in all landscapes from the residential to the commercial, and also incidental public spaces like this, to turn these into catchment surfaces. And at the very least, every drop goes into the water table if it doesn't go into a catchment tank to be repurposed. So this is showing tanks going under parking lots, some of the water becoming a daylit stream, huge facilities located under schools and other institutions. Basically, California, as you know, is beset by this perpetual drought over and over again, with every now and then a year of relief where they get enough rain and recharge their reservoirs. So this is a strategy for catching the billions of gallons that are falling on their heads in San Francisco that they get rid of every year, and instead to capture it and use it as a resource so that really they treat their entire urban landscape as an opportunity or a facility that then they would treat very differently. And of course, this is a model for the entire Bay, and Rockefeller intends this to be a model for the world. Okay, another category. We're working on a lot of different projects where people are coming back to the land, reclaiming farms that have otherwise just been directed at market commodities, and instead having multiple families live together and then create more perennial-based forestry systems, and also things like silvopasture, where you actually have animals running through and enriching the soil to engender more productivity in the perennial trees and orchards. In this design, we're actually using the road surface itself as a catchment system to feed all of these ponds that are characterized by aquaculture, and the ponds actually then overflow to water all of the orchard trees that are located in on-contour troughs. This is very much a permaculture design. This is at Our Eco Village, also on Vancouver Island. And most of the buildings here are natural buildings, and it's very much a permaculture demonstration project on a huge site. In fact, their greatest success is that they've created a zone that integrates education, living, and working into one place legally. And it wasn't actually legal to do all of that in one place before. But obviously, it's an educational center where people live, and then the educational processes are all implemented by hand. Hands-on processes of implementation of the infrastructure of this transformative model. This is an example of that in a retrofit fashion, not far from where I'm sitting in Southeast Portland. This is called Kailash Eco Village, and it's probably the highest performing urban eco village that I've ever seen. And part of their success is that they have legalized humanure within the city, and the use of urine as an agricultural amendment in the urban environment. They actually legalized it for the entire city. You can literally poop in a bucket in Portland, Oregon as your primary sanitation system because of this group. This is working with a group of East Indian families. They're actually part of one larger family, and they've acquired land in Clackamas County just outside of Portland, where they all want to kind of bring all the members of their families together to live and work and have an agricultural economic basis for themselves. And we've democratized the design process by having pieces of paper that people can just move around in conversation in order to test design ideas. And then once there's a configuration, we take a photo, and then another person at the table creates a different configuration, and we keep moving the pieces around until everyone ultimately agrees on the design objective. And this is showing the same design, but in a phased solution, looking at the as-built condition, and then the first phase implementation to occur in the first year, which is what they're now working on. This is the 5-year plan. And of course, they're prioritizing the things that they have to get done first. So things like building a workshop first, out of which they can build other infrastructure, would be part of what they do. And initial, most important gardens that feed themselves would be part of the first thing they have to do. But this is the 5-year view, and then this is the built-out view of the entire design. But it begins with an interactive design process where everyone is activating their intelligence and experience and sharing it. And that kind of approach has been vilified by some kind of unfortunate, kind of confusing mythologies and stories in Western culture, like, oh no, there's this great averaging where nothing, really great or special comes out of it. And what I've found is that's absolutely a lie, that by bringing all of these brains together in a respectful way, people are actually able to learn from each other and come up with an optimum solution that everyone agrees on. And just to go back for a second, this is the final solution that they came up with that was refined, that everyone agreed was optimal. And we had 10 people from this family, from these families representing all the families sitting at the table together. And they actually came to agreement, and none of them wanted to change it. So it was thrilling to see this coalesce within a matter of only 2 hours among people who had never actually designed, in a kind of a two-dimensional way like this before. I just want to verify, we have a faith that everyone is a designer. And we all have design proclivities and design experience in our own lives in making choices and modifying our environments to some extent. And so we just build on that when we're working with people. This is working with Narendra Varma. He is a brilliant visionary, founding employee of Microsoft, and now he's creating our agricultural initiatives that are prototypes using permaculture and other kind of radical design philosophies for agriculture. So this is his initial project, about 65 acres. And of course, primary objectives are to sequester carbon, build soil fertility, and sequester carbon through engendering soil fertility, but also to build to grow the most sumptuous food that only goes to the most immediate markets. So to minimize carbon impact, absolutely. And the architecture, of course, is a model as well. But the best model about this is that he benefacted 4 small farmer families access to and involvement to, and then livelihood out of this place. He was able to use his vast wealth to be able to do that. Which is a marvelous process. This is just a snippet here of a related project where we're working on multifamily housing. Within single family zones, we're making gigantic houses that actually function. They're categorized as single family, but they actually function as giant kind of pueblo buildings that have a lot of different families within each structure. And the overall project is categorized as an agrihood. So they live within these foodscapes that they're cultivating for their own benefit, but then they also sell, they export. I'm just showing you a few of the projects that we're working on today, and these are some of the more delightful. This one is for bicycle activists only. It's a 50 by 100 lot, so gosh, I'm not used to converting into meters, I'm sorry, but 50 by 100 is 5,000 square feet. And these are 180 square foot cottages, along with a very small original house. And they all collectively own this site. And they only have a spot for unloading compost for the gardens. But otherwise, there's no parking. In fact, Portland, Oregon has just in the last month and a half declared that no one has to build parking anywhere anymore as a way of disincentivizing parking. So we want more arable land. We want more usable, functional space. We want to incentivize multimodal transportation and the use of transportation systems that we've been investing in. And so no one in any residential circumstance especially has to provide parking anymore, even single family homes. Here's a micro infill co-housing project. And this is, you're seeing the vernacular fabric of the town, which is people are on 5,000 square foot lots with single family homes, and maybe garages or secondary homes on there. And this is a slightly larger lot where we have 2 primary homes and 2 secondary homes. The thing about co-housing, though, is that everyone collectively owns the land together, and then they own the homes separately, so individually. So there's this wonderful balance of kind of you're having your own sovereignty while you also have things that you share with others. Now, this is this lovely thing that our permaculture design students did recently, and we've kind of, we've realized this is this whole other sort of frontier of activism that's been available to us the whole time. So people are used to explain this, people are used to kind of vilifying developers and just kind of blaming them for the things that happen in terms of designing landscapes of isolation and just being kind of profit-oriented and making reductionist places. So we set our permaculture students loose on the developers, sent them out to respectfully ask for the plans before places were actually developed, actually built. And then our permaculture students cycle them through a design analysis and then come back to the developers with a set of suggestions about how to humanize the landscape, build gathering places, engender catchment, and have alternative water treatment systems and energy generation and the like. And the interaction creates a receptivity that wouldn't have otherwise been there if the developers simply protested against. So what we found is the developers being very thankful and actually saying that they're enriched by the process. And then, word gets out very quickly, and then more developers are interested, and then they kind of lean forward on their chairs, kind of more engaged than they would have been otherwise. And so this, I hope for you that are listening today that this might be presenting some ideas for opportunities where you are. to more constructively engage. This is working with people who are contending with autism, and this is actually a village designed for autistic people to actually own and self-manage to a great extent with some amount of on-site family-based support. And the curriculum that makes this possible for autistic people to function this way is based on kind of this land-based interaction and observation process over time that brings the autistic members of the community together in planned ways where they can actually act with collective intent, but then also individual ways where they can act within their own realms. And we have more than a few projects where permaculture is actually the kind of healing curriculum that brings people together who would otherwise not be able to function. I mean, this, it's just a strategy for everyone, though, because I personally am feeling these days that without such a basis, how can anyone function? This is a more dense version of co-housing, and again, we're within the vernacular. For us, when we're working on urban eco-villages and co-housing projects, what's radical for us, what satisfies us, is the social configuration, shared ownership, and collaborative processes. And the architecture itself, if it's fairly quiet and textured to kind of relate to the community around it, then it stands a better chance of being embraced. This is one of our more famous and one of my favorite projects. This is Dignity Village, which began in 1999. This is the United States flagship for kind of retroactively supporting the idea of something like a favela, but happening in the USA. So that, people have been living in shanty towns and in unapproved circumstances for the longest time just by necessity. But in 2000, we managed to actually persuade the city government of Portland to enable people to create these DIY tiny home-based, super high performance, low cost, quick action villages, beginning with Dignity Village here. So you're just getting this view into one of their kind of typical neighborhoods. There's a lot more to this story, but I would just say that one of the most transferable lessons that has actually been enabling this concept to transfer city by city is that the homeless people simply will not give up. If they don't give up and they continue to constructively propose, then eventually a project is able to advance, especially if they have allies standing with them. This is the Kenton Women's Village. And this village, once it came online, was so successful and so broadly embraced with almost no political resistance that we now have so many construction companies engaged that we literally have an inventory of tiny home villages ready to deploy that are not even utilized yet. So this has been very inspiring, like in terms of service learning opportunities for kids in middle schools and high schools, and lots of different family circumstances. People want to come out, and this gives them a way to help to make a difference. And then let's look at this category. Okay, so this is using permaculture with a population contending with Asperger's, where people come onto the site, and all these buildings are using straw bales. So it's a prototype just outright for permaculture and natural building. But the entire 25-acre site is a permaculture installation where you can see that on contour there are swales everywhere, and in every swale we kind of have these alternating swales where one swale is a line of edible berries, another line will be just simply pollinators, but of course they get mixed up and they're all interrupted by pathways and roadways and then the installation of buildings. So you have this kind of corduroy pattern which predominates throughout aesthetically, which is just, it's going to be an astounding thing once the thing is finished. The program has begun, though. Even before they've completed their fundraising process, they're already out on the site doing this work. And that's really as permaculture would have it. You just start immediately with whatever you have. This is a really similar kind of project, but it's more urban, and it's working with houseless people to be able to have a facility. This is called the Personalist Center, and they come here for their mail, to be able to use phones and computers, make job applications. They're able to get personal hygiene supplies, and they're even able to organize politically here. And this is supported by the Sisters of the Road organization, which is a radical kind of cafe in downtown Portland. But this is very much of kind of a village node for a nomadic faction of the culture. This is working with VOS, which is an organization founded by Cesar Chavez years ago. And this is a kind of a local facility that we've worked with the community of workers, of day laborers, to design. And then they will build using their skills. But this is an organizing facility that helps connect them to the economic sort of job opportunities that are happening out in the larger Portland area. This is the rebuilding center of our United Villages, and this thing is, I just can't say enough about it, but I think the most outstanding feature is that nobody who works here comes from beyond walking distance. So they're modeling carbon reduction just by how they've been, super dedicated to being a revitalizing entity for the immediate community. And so they hire from the immediate community, but the building itself is entirely made out of cast-off material. So it has the highest recycled and natural content of any commercial building in the United States. But to me, the localization focus is really what this is its primary success. But you go inside of the building and you find that it's filled with materials that are redirected from the waste stream to be made available for pennies on the dollar to the surrounding community. So even as bits of the surrounding community are being torn down, the pieces of it go to the rebuilding center so that those pieces can find new life with an affordable basis in the immediate community. So this is very much kind of standing against the tide of gentrification. Okay, we're gonna have to go through this real fast. Our city has a growth boundary to protect farm and forest land all around it, and you can see kind of how that's depicted. It's 3 counties, actually, not just the city, but all the cities within the 3-county area are contained by a growth boundary. So we're trying to kind of reinvest constantly in the urban infrastructure that's linked together by transit systems. And when we're focusing growth on the transit systems and in the urban centers. I'm going to depict this through food, though. What we're doing within that boundary, just in terms of urban agriculture, I'm going to depict using food. So the red lentils around the perimeter are just the growth boundaries effect on Portland alone. Within Portland, all the different gardens and community gardens that are happening are depicted by peas and dried sunflower seeds. This is another view of Kailash. It's just one of many places that are infilling the open space in the city with food productivity, including basically just conventional housing developments. But now the rise of the co-housing movement. People are growing food everywhere in circumstances where people are living. This is the headquarters of City Repair right here, and so our actual site is itself a demonstration project. And here we are, kind of very early in the morning one Saturday, putting in an illegal secret swale to just drink water directly off of the street. And that's just part of the installation. And I'm showing you that just for fun, but all of that activity we have some designer lettuce here sprinkled onto our plan in the city. Of course, community gardens are happening all over the place, and many of them are happening in schoolyards where hard pan parking lots are being taken up in order to make space for a community gardening curriculum. Even rooftops, of course, and some of these are actually happening at schools. We're depicting that by mushrooms. Of course, food cooperatives are absolutely essential and catalytic for the expanding network of urban agriculture in the city. And there are culturally specific cultures that are undertaking initiatives that also very much embed social justice priorities. There are groups that are organizing gleaning operations of existing orchards, but then also gleaning from other orchards that haven't been planned and installed cooperatively. So we're seeing a circle of hazelnuts to recognize that we now have a food policy council that's coordinating all of this, and kind of a wreath of spinach leaves, and then sprinkled spinach leaves to depict kind of the fact that this activity is happening all over the city. People are doing these wonderful things like, these bike trailers taking their food starts down to the community market. So they're kind of demonstrating alternative transportation at the same time as the localization of food productivity. urban installations of vertical gardening, in this case, a 7-layered food forest, which also acts as a passive cooling strategy for this local office building. But this is a very famous food forest. People come from all over the world to see. Sometimes we're even hanging trees off of buildings and then installing vegetal graphics on the sides of buildings. And I just think this is a lovely new development that wasn't foreseen. This is my friend Henry. He's a native. He actually has been running a native seed library for the last few decades, and this is his urban CSA. And we have urban CSAs all over the city now, and distribution points. You're seeing that kind of this vortex of food-related activity that's, you know, a means to build community as much as anything else. Of course, seed-saving events and seed-saving organizations are key to becoming increasingly resilient. Farmers markets all over the city. We have 50 farmers markets every week in the city now, and expanding. So it's obviously just becoming dense and swirling with activity, with a culture that is becoming aware, deeply aware and animated around the issues that are facing us. This is a converted, gigantic, historic warehouse for the farmers of the region to come together and basically have parties and share stories. And that's depicted with this giant apple in Southeast Portland. Doctors reinventing their own offices and surrounding themselves with farms. And in this case, our friend Dove, who's a doctor, is teaching people about growing their own food and preparing their own food as part of his healing practice. These are housing. This is depicting one of our favorite, Sabin CDC, Community Development Corporation, that provides affordable housing for Portlanders. And they're transitioning their landscape from being merely decorative to being edible and basically maintained and utilized by the inhabiting populations. This is a vision for just revegetating the roadways and creating pollinator corridors all around the city. Obviously, it's a beautification project as well as pollinator support. Repurposing marginal spaces to create food forests is happening on the West Coast. This is a camas planting initiative to restore native camas populations to the Northwest region. And we actually have a Nez Perce Native American inspector here overseeing the urban dwellers as they're restoring the camas. And, you know, part of his initiative recognizes that colonists or settlers came in and destroyed the camas populations that were feeding native people intentionally. And so it's an act of toward reconciliation to help restore them wherever we can. Here's our friend Judy Bluehorse, who's also a Nez Perce, and she, after all, has been teaching people throughout the region about the importance of not just the existence of native plants and our interaction with them, but the essential need to restore them in every circumstance we can. And in particular, she's focusing on public parks. So the place is pretty wild with activity. We've added some potatoes and some kumquats here and some cranberries just to really juice it up, the salad of the city. And that's what I brought for you today.